You'd think that if two nations were at war, someone would have noticed. After all, there would be soldiers, there would be declarations, there'd be, the odd explosion, that kind of shit. And yet, scattered throughout history are wars that technically dragged on for years after the practical arrangements for peace had been reached, for one reason or another. Or more rather, that's what some out there say, because we checked the matter out ourselves, and yeah, it turns out that basically all such instances are actually just total nonsense, urban legends, and just nothing more than that. That's why we have, or so they say in the title. This video is going to be something different, and then we realised, this is just a bunch of myths, so let's bust them! Okay, to get us started, let's have a look at a war between the Netherlands and these tiny little lumps of granite off the southwestern coast of the United Kingdom, the Isles of Scilly. It was quite the long affair too, having supposedly lasted for a whole 335 years, from 1651 to 1986. The casualties in this bitter multi-century long blood feud? Well, that would be absolutely zero. That's dead and injured. Not so much as a toe was even stubbed in this war. Really, it was quite the absurd and laughable affair. But what was meant to have sparked it all, well, that was very serious indeed, and that would be the English Civil Wars of 1642 to 1651 would definitely kill people. And look, at TLDR, for those of you not in the know, the King Charles I, elected as he wasn't, and Parliament elected as they weren't exactly in agreement about who actually held ultimate authority over England, with specific disputes over matters such as levying taxes and religion eventually exploding into full-scale armed conflict between the royalists and the parliamentarian factions. They then both shoot and stab each other for a while, perhaps as much as 5% of England's population dies. The parliamentarians win, Charles gets his head cut off in 1649, a chap called Oliver Cromwell takes power of a short-lived English republic, finishes off royalist holdouts, and after enacting some truly nutty policy and winning himself lots of fans in Ireland, the monarchy is restored under Charles II in 1660, thus ending what was quite possibly history's most pointlessly destructive conflict ever. And it is within all of that that the war between the Netherlands and the Isles of Scilly broke out. As you've likely guessed from the years, it happened right at the end of the Civil Wars, just as Cromwell was taking care of the royalist holdouts who had been pushed back to Cornwall, the bit of England that sticks out at the bottom on the left-hand side. They got absolutely creamed when Cromwell did finally roll in, and the survivors fled to the Isles of Scilly to hold out and eventually retake the mainland, a China and Taiwan situation 300 years ago, in essence. And to do that, they'd need money, and so they turned to piracy, with Dutch vessels in particular being heavily targeted. The Dutch, for their part, newly independent as they were rather miffed by this turn of events, and so they threw their lot in with Cromwell, dispatching a war fleet under Lieutenant Admiral Martin Harpedson Tromp to see the situation resolved. Hopefully with a show of force and some reparations therefrom, and if that failed, by dishing out a good shoeing. As noted by Bulstrode Whitelock, a contemporary member of Parliament, it's the most old-school British name ever, Bulstrode, who jotted extensive notes on all of this, Tromp, after, quote, receiving no satisfactory answer, he had, according to his commission, declared war on them, end quote. Them being the royalist-administered Isles of Scilly specifically, not the entirety of England. The shoeing, however, proved to be London's to give out, because before the Dutch could get stuck in, Parliament's Admiral Robert Blake rocked up with his own fleet and beat them to it, forcing a royalist surrender. And that worked perfectly for the Dutch. They still got what they wanted and hadn't even had to shoot off any expensive cannons for the pleasure, so they packed up and they went home, having never bothered to formally declare any kind of peace. The matter being somewhat of a moot one, given that the royalist administration now just didn't exist anymore. Then in 1652, the Netherlands and England proper did go to war, and when it was resolved in 1654 by the Treaty of Westminster, the matter of the Dutch having previously declared war on a bit of England just wasn't addressed at all. Frankly, it just wasn't really important enough. Basically, no one remembered that it had even happened by that point, and of those who did, no one thought there was actually a state of war in any real way, and so it just went unaddressed, understandably. Fast forward 3 centuries to the mid-1980s, and a Scillonian, that's what people from the Isle of Scilly are called. Okay then, councillor and local historian named Roy Duncan came across this old declaration of war against his islands, and for his own curiosity he investigated to see if the matter had ever actually been resolved, and of course, he discovered that it hadn't. In response, he raised an army and marched on Amsterdam. Actually, no, he didn't do that. He just drafted a polite letter to the Dutch embassy, pointed out how amusing the whole matter was, and invited them to sign an armistice, i.e. have a photo op. And so it was that Ambassador Jonkheer Goedekoper found himself on the Isles of Scilly on the 17th of April 1986, and with a stroke of a pen, the 335-year war came to an end. But was it actually a war at all? Well, according to Rex Bowley, another Silonian historian, no, it wasn't. As far as he is concerned, Trump likely had no commission to declare war anyway, making the whole matter a moot one, as no war actually ever existed to then be forgotten about. Then there's the fact that the Scilly Islands weren't sovereign, and so any lingering quarrel was de facto covered by the Treaty of Westminster. All the war really was then was a PR stunt built on the flimsiest pretexts. It worked though, didn't it? Because how many of you had even heard of the Scilly Isles before today? Me. It's why I know they're pronounced silly rather than silly, like because there's a C in there. It makes more sense if you were reading this. You're watching it on YouTube. Maybe there'll be some text on the screen. If you believe the internet, Andorra, the 181-square-mile micronation squeezed in on the French and Spanish border, spent the first half of the 20th century technically at war with Germany from 1914 right through to 1958, purely because someone forgot to invite them to Versailles. And as far as stories go, admittedly, that's quite a fun one. A nation so small the asthmatic could jog the length of it in a single breath, declaring war on the Kaiser, and then just being totally forgotten about. The problem, however, is just that. It's a story, it's a tale that belongs in the fiction section because it's just complete nonsense. So let's start unpacking this by taking stock of what Andorra actually was in 1914. Not a country per se, but a peculiar little co-princedom jointly ruled by the President of France and the Bishop of Urgell just over the border in Catalonia. They had no standing army, no navy, barely a police force, just a traditional local militia, the Somatons, that did a good enough job of bashing crims, but as a military force it was about as notable as a fart in a wind tunnel. And now that we have a bit of context, the myth. It originated from United Press International, that being a global agency that gathers and distributes news to reporters. It was in a wire dated September 1958, which gleefully announced that World War I is over for this 191-square-mile Pyrenean republic. And from there, because why would a trade as noble as that of journalism ever lie, the story spread like wildfire through the American newspapers and solidified itself in the public consciousness, where it remained well enough remembered to eventually be uploaded to the internet, and from there, bada bing, bada boom, click harvesting sites of various different strips sent the myth into the stratosphere. For years it remained as accepted wisdom, but then, when the Andorrans themselves started questioning it, it soon became apparent that United Press International had simply pulled the fact right out of their bottom. The digging began in 2014 when Radio y Televisió d'Andorra, Andorra's national broadcaster, Andorra, you're like this big, asked historian Pere Cavero to start digging through the archives and search for more information about the famous peculiar turn in their nation's history. And after said digging, he found nothing. Literally zero. There was no declaration of war in 1914, no peace treaty from 1958. All there was evidence of was the fact that Andorra's leadership had done the sensible thing, taken one look at the utterly pointless industrialized slaughter of millions of young men all over the continent, properly said, "F*** that," and not gotten involved at all. Remaining neutral. Smart play. That's not to say that Andorrans didn't fight in the war at all, as a whopping 3 of them did. For some reason, they opted to go and fight with France, but as a nation, politically, they were neutral, and there were no ifs or buts about the matter. That is why Andorra didn't send a big hat over to Versailles to represent it, because it wasn't invited, because it didn't fight. Plenty of nations were left out in the cold, with Spain, Sweden, and the Netherlands all being examples thereof, and none of them were exactly militarily insignificant either, although they were occasionally invited to specific individual commissions if they were being affected by the matter being discussed. Even the defeated powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria, weren't invited to the initial negotiations. It was a negotiation for the victors, and Andorra wasn't a victor, because they didn't take part. This puts a heavy burden on you viewers too, because this is a myth that just will not die, and so it falls upon you to crap on the misinformation bonfires wherever you should find them, like we're doing today. Here's a good one. Montenegro apparently declared war on Japan in 1904, did nothing about it, and then forgot to formally end it until 2006. No ships, no battles, no casualties, just a war so low-key that neither side even noticed it was happening. Unfortunately, though, it, of course, isn't true. Not to say that there wasn't a war, mind you, because there absolutely was. The Russia-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, a modern industrial slugfest from Manchuria to Tsushima that ended with a humiliating defeat for Russia and its signing of the equally humiliating Treaty of Portsmouth, which saw Russia cede the southern half of the island of Sakhalin, its leasehold rights to the port of Lashunko, and the railways that it controlled in northern China. It was an absolute humiliation for the old power of Russia and the beginning of Japan as a modern great power. So where does Montenegro supposedly fit into all of that? Well, it doesn't really, not in any formal sense anyway. What did happen was that a number of Montenegrin volunteers fired up their long-standing loyalty to Russia and the promise of a good fight and went east to fight under the Tsar's banner. I mean, that part is true. What isn't true is the oft-repeated claim that the country itself, the tiny mountain-locked Principality of Montenegro, officially declared war on Japan. It did not. There's no record of any declaration, no telegrams, no royal decrees, no signatures, nothing. Just volunteers, rumors, and a whole lot of wishful thinking. So where does the 2006 end of the war story come from then? Well, basically it's down to a perfect storm of lazy reporting and diplomatic theatre. When Montenegro voted for independence in 2006, foreign ministries everywhere rushed to issue formal recognitions. Japan's response was perfectly routine. Vice Minister Akihiko Yamanaka flew to Podgorica to deliver a letter from Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi officially recognizing the new Republic of Montenegro. And that's it. No treaty, no truce, no declaration of peace, just a polite, welcome to the club. But one journalist decided that their story wasn't quite sexy enough, and so the new narrative about the peace deal for the war that never was appeared from thin air. We did try to get to the bottom of exactly who it was that invented it too, but we had no luck. We followed the paper trail back to the original United Press International wire, dated on the 16th of June 2006, and it was unnamed. The Japanese government, for its part, was deeply confused when the story broke. They'd released their own press statement the very same day, and all it mentioned was Japan's recognition of Montenegro as a nation and the beginning of formal diplomatic relations therefrom. Definitely no mention of a war. And only confusing them further was the fact that the Diet, Japan's national legislature, had investigated the matter for themselves back in February, when the question of Montenegro's independence had first come up, and they had found no evidence of Montenegro ever having declared war on Japan at all, nor any evidence that they had declared war on Montenegro. By that point, though, the damage had been done. A lie makes the headline, and a correction makes the back pages, and so it spread uncorrected, eventually finding its way to various online history publications, where indeed we found it ourselves, and then chose to, look at it properly. And now for entry number 4, the false claim that Japan and China are technically still at war. And this one's a complicated matter too, because A, the specifics of why not depend on which China you mean, and B, while both Chinas did remain technically at war with Japan until way after the end of World War II, they, in stark contrast to what is sometimes stated, aren't still now, with both situations having long since been resolved. First, the two Chinas thing. It's a situation that doesn't get discussed much openly because every Western nation made the really intelligent choice of outsourcing its manufacturing to a nation that belongs to a different geopolitical bloc to their own, and so politicians can't afford to wind Beijing up. But yes, there are indeed two Chinas, the People's Republic of China and the Republic of China. Both of them were born out of the rotting corpse of Imperial China, with the Cliff's Notes version of the story being the Qings, China's last imperial dynasty, were a bunch of incompetent tits, so did nothing as China lost its leading place in the world and slowly started to be picked apart by foreign colonial powers. They were then overthrown by the Xinhai Revolution of 1911, and the Republic of China was founded in 1912. The Republic of China then immediately implodes as regional warlords start carving up the country for themselves. They deal with them one by one. The communists under Mao then appear and escalate the situation into a proper civil war in 1927. They put the civil war on hold after the Japanese invasion of 1937, and then after World War II, they immediately remember why they despise one another and the civil war resumes. The Republic of China, the so-called nationalists, lose in 1949. They flee to Taiwan, where they plan to reinvade the mainland, but never do. And similarly, the communists plan to invade Taiwan, but due to their navy being a bit shit, never did. But they did declare the People's Republic of China in 1949. So that explains the two Chinas. It's an East versus West Germany or a North versus South Korea situation, basically, but with the ideological split being caused by geography rather than border meddling by the then superpowers. And so how did Japan end World War II with both of these places? For the Republic of China, the key thing to remember is that when the war ended in 1945, Japan signed its surrender with the Allied powers, not with individual countries. That surrender document, signed aboard the USS Missouri on the 2nd of September 1945, was accepted on behalf of the Allied powers, which included the Republic of China. So technically, the war ended at that moment. But the formal piece, the one that replaces surrender with an actual treaty, took a bit longer. Basically, in 1951, Japan and 48 Allied nations signed the San Francisco Peace Treaty, which restored Japan's sovereignty and legally ended its state of war with most of the Allies. And this is where the problems start to come in. Because by that point, the nationalists had fled to Taiwan, and the communists had established the People's Republic of China on the mainland. The Americans, for their part, just didn't want to pick a side at that point, and so they didn't invite either China. This left Japan in a bit of an odd position. The war with China was de facto over, but de jure unsettled because there was no peace treaty with either government. So Tokyo decided to fix that first with the China it still recognized at the time, the Republic of China, and thus the Treaty of Taipei came to be signed on the 28th of April 1952, and it could not be clearer that it was a formal end to hostilities, as it stated that, quote, "The state of war between Japan and the Republic of China is terminated as from the date on which the present treaty enters force." End quote. That sorted things out with Taipei, but not with Beijing, and the Communists' resolution would be quite some time coming too, as for the next 20 years, Japan refused to acknowledge the People's Republic of China, completely blocking any kind of formal relations, and with it, any formal end to the war. That changed in 1972, though, as Tokyo finally switched diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing, leading to the immediate signing of the Japan-China Joint Communique on the 29th of September, which declared that, quote, "The abnormal state of affairs that has hitherto existed between Japan and the People's Republic of China is terminated," end quote. Beijing also renounced all claims to war reparations, a big deal at that time, and both sides pledged to never use or threaten force against one another. In essence, that communique was a peace treaty in everything but name. And then 6 years later, they made it official with the signing of the Treaty of Peace and Friendship on the 12th of August 1978. So in closing, yes, in stark contrast to what articles such as this say, Japan and China, both of them, have formally signed peace deals and are not, by any pedantic metric, still at war. The Crimean War officially ended in 1856, unless apparently you lived in Berwick-upon-Tweed, a town so small it supposedly got lost somewhere between the signatures. Basically, according to the myth, Berwick spent the next century at war with Russia because a clerk forgot to write its name on the peace treaty. There were no battles, no declarations, just bureaucracy doing what bureaucracy does best, and of course that's up. But why Berwick? It seems a bit random, doesn't it? Why not some other jewel from the lands of the Anglos, like, I don't know, Blackpool or Hull? Jewels. Well, it turns out Berwick isn't just any town, it's a border town, and because of the English and the Scots' age-old tradition of killing each other over one disagreement or another, at least until they kissed and made up with the 1707 Act of Union, Berwick changed ownership constantly as the borders were redrafted after various moments of conquest and calamity for both sides. And this created quite the pickle in 1707, because while both Scotland and England were now unified as a single kingdom, they were, and indeed are, still separate nations therein. So, who actually owned Berwick? Or more rather, who should own it? It was on the English side when the curtain fell, but to recognise the rather unique history of the place, the town was given its own semi-legal status as being of the kingdom, but not in it. Basically, no one owns it. So there, now none of you could complain. That only lasted a few decades, though, because Parliament quickly got tired of the new legalese, which was still causing no end of confusion among the nation's important sorts, and so they passed the 1746 Wales and Berwick Act, which, among other things, declared that England included Berwick. And at this point, if you believe the oft-thrown-around story, it turned out that tradition was a hard-broken thing in the land of your local pub, being older than most countries, and so the old ways of referring to Berwick clung on in there all the way through to the mid-19th century, including during the Crimean War when Britain declared war on Russia as part of a coalition defending the Ottoman Empire. and you can probably guess where it goes from here. Berwick was included on the declaration of war, wasn't included in the 1856 Treaty of Paris that ended it, blah blah blah, thus Berwick and Russia are still technically at war. And as much as we wish we could say it was true because it would make for a cracking video, alas, we already know that it isn't. It's another big load of nonsense. It is a perfect story though, because it sounds just plausible enough. Britain's bureaucracy is famous for being hilariously inept, unless it's HMRC telling you underpaid your taxes by £1, but we digress. So, of course, some hapless clerk in Whitehall could have misplaced an entire town. But when people actually checked the records, they found nothing. The official war proclamation refers to Her Majesty the Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. No mention of Berwick at all, and the 1856 peace treaty uses the exact same language. No rogue commas, no loopholes, no forgotten boroughs left to glare menacingly at the Tsar. The Foreign Office confirmed it too, twice in fact. First in the 1930s and then again in 1965 after yet another newspaper dredged up the rumour. Their verdict was the same both times. No foundation whatsoever. The whole thing, they concluded, was the product of lazy retelling, civic pride, and Britain's incurable love of self-deprecating absurdity. But then, rather than the myth just slowly fading and dying as you would expect, it was kept alive because a British politician thought it would be funny to look a Russian in the eye and make a joke. The Russian in question was a correspondent from Pravda, the Soviet state-run newspaper, who just happened to be in Berwick in 1966, visiting for one reason or another. And when there, he asked the town's mayor, one Robert Knox, about the belief that the town and his nation were still at war, to which Knox replied, quote, "Please tell the Russian people through your newspaper that they can sleep peacefully in their beds." It was a Berwick line. Funny, charming, very, very British. Newspapers everywhere ran with it, and by the time the story filtered back through translations and rewrites, the Pravda journalist had become a Soviet envoy, and Knox's offhand remark had turned into a formal peace treaty. There was, of course, no treaty, just a photo, a handshake, and a joke. So why does the legend refuse to die? Well, 3 reasons really. 1, Berwick's centuries of legal oddness left a long trail of documents that make the myth sound credible. 2, people love stories where government red tape goes catastrophically wrong. The idea that the Foreign Office could accidentally leave a small English town at war with Russia is just irresistible. And 3, it's just funny. It makes for fun dinner party material, and even more importantly, great tourist brochures for the town of Berwick. And look, we hate to have to ruin a fun story, do we? But no, Berwick-upon-Tweed didn't spend a century at war with Russia. Thank you for watching.